Okay, I think it's going live now.
All right, let me just take a quick check there. The joy of live theater. Ah, there it is. Eventide is live now. Fantastic. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. As always, an adventure. Technology is so exciting. You do things exactly the same way every single time, and for some reason, it never seems to work consistently. Anyways, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us on this version of Eventide Tales. This is an exciting one. Toby has put together a fantastic program of science fiction and maybe a little science horror, or at least some science and moral dilemma, which is always the best science fiction for us this afternoon. My name is Chris Edwards. I'm the artistic director here at Eventide Theater, and I want to thank you very much for joining us today. If you were enjoying what we do, if you've watched us in the past, or if you're joining us for just the first time, I would encourage you to please take a moment and consider making a donation to support our organization. It's very easy to do. You type our initials, the theater initials, ETC. It's very easy. Type ETC to the number 44321, and it will bring you to a web page which will allow you to make a donation. We encourage donations in any amount. Buy us a cup of coffee, buy us a theater ticket, buy us a new theater. That'd be fine too. Any amount that you'd like to contribute would absolutely be welcome. We at Eventide Theater are very excited about what is coming up for 2021. Next week, we are having our premiere of our winter showcase. For those of you who are not aware, Eventide Theater has also been sponsoring a playwrights lab called Playwrights Etc. Playwrights Etc. Works with local playwrights and encourages local playwrights to develop new material, which we then try to produce through our various media. Our winter showcase, which exhibits short works from all of these authors, will appear. Somebody muted me. It tells me when I'm talking too long. That will be premiering next weekend at 4 o'clock at the same time here on Facebook. And also, we're going to be shifting ourselves over to YouTube. So you'll be able to follow us on YouTube Live as well. More on that. But you'll get 3 days of short plays, original works on all 3 days, on the 13th, 14th, and 15th. And that's going to kick off our new season of the Virtual Playhouse. We'll also be announcing our season for 2021 very, very soon. And we are taking submissions for our 2021 Songwriters Competition. And we do encourage anyone out there who is a songwriter, who knows a songwriter, has a song in their heart that they're desperate to get out there. Here's a great opportunity to put, your pen to paper and get your notes out there and have your vision heard. So we have a lot of great stuff going on in Eventide. Follow us on Facebook if you're not already following us. Go to our webpage and sign up for our newsletter. Just so much happening. And again, we ask if you're enjoying what we do, please consider continuing to support us through a financial donation, either through text ETC 44321 or use one of the links on our Facebook or website page to make a donation. Now, ladies and gentlemen, as I said at the very beginning, today's program is going to be a lot of fun, and I'm going to turn it right over to Toby to take it away and let us know what we can expect for today. Toby?
Thank you, Chris. I've always been a fan of science fiction ever since I saw 2001: A Space Odyssey when I was 7 years old. One of the things that I find with science fiction or any other genre, that the best of it really sort of transcends the genre and becomes something greater than what the limitations of the genre happens. And that's what I hope we have for you today. A series of wonderful stories by outstanding authors. We're going to begin that now with our first story. Our first story is by Arthur C. Clarke. Clarke is one of the most popular and successful science fiction writers of the 20th century. He wrote many books, short stories, and essays for popular magazines. He co-wrote the screenplay with Stanley Kubrick for the 1968 film 2001: A Space Odyssey, one of the most influential films of all time, and it was based on his short story, The Sentinel. But in 1971, Clarke wrote the short story you are about to hear called Reunion. In it, an advanced civilization that seeded the Earth with humans eons ago returns to our planet and makes mankind a startling offer. The story will be read by Pamela Lambert.
Reunion by Arthur C. Clarke. People of earth, do not be afraid. We come in peace. And why not? For we are your cousins. We have been here before. You will recognize us when we meet a few hours from now. We are approaching the solar system almost as swiftly as this radio message. Already, your sun dominates the sky ahead of us. It is the sun of our ancestors and yours, shared 10 million years ago. We are men, as you are, but you have forgotten your history, while we have remembered ours. We colonized Earth in the reign of the great reptiles who were dying when we came and whom we could not save. Your world was a tropical planet then, and we felt that it would make a fair home for our people. We were wrong. Though we were masters of space, we knew so little about climate, about evolution, about genetics. For millions of summers, there were no winters in those ancient days, the colony flourished. Isolated though it had to be, in a universe where the journey from one star to the next takes years, it kept in touch with its parent civilization. 3 or 4 times in every century, starships would call and bring news of the galaxy. But 2 million years ago, Earth began to change. For ages, it had been a tropical paradise. Then the temperature fell, and the ice began to creep down from the poles. As the climate altered, so did the colonists. We realize now that it was a natural adaptation to the end of the long summer, but those who had made the earth their home for so many generations believed that they had been attacked by a strange and repulsive disease, a disease that did not kill, that did no physical harm, but merely disfigured. Yet some were immune. The change spared them and their children. And so, within a few thousand years, the colony had split into 2 separate groups, almost separate species, suspicious and jealous of each other. The division brought envy, discord, and ultimately conflict. As the colony disintegrated and the climate steadily worsened, those who could do so withdrew from Earth. The rest sank into barbarism. We could have kept in touch, but there is so much to do in a universe of 100 trillion stars. Until a few years ago, we did not know that any of you had survived. Then we picked up your first radio signals, learned your simple languages, and discovered that you had made the long climb back from savagery. We come to greet you, our long-lost relatives, and to help you. We have discovered much in the eons since we abandoned Earth. If you wish us to bring back the eternal summer that ruled before the ice ages, we can do so. Above all, we have a simple remedy for the offensive yet harmless genetic plague that afflicted so many of the colonists. Perhaps it has run its course. But if not, we have good news for you, people of Earth. You can rejoin the society of the universe without shame, without embarrassment. If any of you are still white, we can cure you.
Thank you, Pam. Our next story is by a Cape Cod favorite. Kurt Vonnegut Jr. was a resident of Barnstable Village for many years. His best known work is Slaughterhouse Five, which was made into a movie by George Roy Hill in 1972. Vonnegut published 14 novels, 3 short story collections, 5 plays, and 5 works of nonfiction. Vonnegut's stories were often darkly comic, and in many of them, he promoted the idea that government control is the antagonist to human individuality. Our next story, published in 1962, is called 2B02B, and it imagines a dystopian future where aging does not exist, poverty and want have been eliminated, and war is a thing of the past. But this comes with a price. The story will be read by Stephen Rourke.
To Be Our Zero to Be by Kurt Vonnegut Jr. Everything was perfectly swell. There were no prisons, no slums, no insane asylums, no cripples, no poverty, no wars. All diseases were conquered. So was old age. Death, barring accidents, was an adventure for volunteers. The population of the United States was stabilized at 40 million souls. One bright morning in the Chicago Lying-In Hospital, a man named Edward K. Welling Jr. waited for his wife to give birth. He was the only man waiting. Not many people were born a day anymore. Welling was 56, a mere stripling in a population whose average age was 129. X-rays had revealed that his wife was going to have triplets. The children would be his first. Young Welling was hunched in his chair, his head in his hand. He was so rumpled, so still and colorless as to be virtually invisible. His camouflage was perfect, since the waiting room had a disorderly and demoralized air too. Chairs and ashtrays had been moved away from the walls. The floor was paved with spattered drop cloths. The room was being redecorated. It was being redecorated as a memorial to a man who had volunteered to die. A sardonic old man about 200 years old sat on a stepladder, painting a mural he did not like. Back in the days when people aged visibly, his age would have been guessed at 35 or so. Aging had touched him that much before the cure for aging was found. The mural he was working on depicted a very neat garden. Men and women in white, doctors and nurses, turned the soil, planted seedlings, sprayed bugs, spread fertilizer. Men and women in purple uniforms pulled up weeds, cut down plants that were old and sickly, raked leaves, and carried refuse to trash burners. Never, 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 not even in medieval Holland nor old Japan, had a garden been more formal, been better tended. Every plant had all the loom, light, water, air, and nourishment it could use. A hospital orderly came down the corridor singing under his breath a popular song. If you don't like my kisses, honey, here's what I will do. I'll go see a girl in purple, kiss this sad world toodaloo. If you don't want my lovin', why should I take up all this space? I'll get off this old planet. Let some sweet baby have my place. The orderly looked in at the mural and the muralist. Looks so real, he said. I can practically imagine I'm standing in the middle of it. What makes you think you're not in it? Said the painter. He gave a satiric smile. It's called the happy garden of life, you know. That's good old Dr. Hitz, said the orderly. He was referring to one of the male figures in white, whose head was a portrait of Dr. Benjamin Hitz, the hospital's chief obstetrician. Hitz was a blindingly handsome man. A lot of faces still to fill in, said the orderly. He meant that the faces of many of the figures in the mural were still blank. All blanks were to be filled in with portraits of important people on either the hospital staff or from the Chicago office of the Federal Bureau of Termination. Must be nice to be able to make pictures that look like something, said the orderly. The painter's face curdled with scorn. You think I'm proud of this daub, he said. You think this is my idea of what life really looks like? Well, what's your idea of what life looks like? Said the orderly. The painter gestured at a foul drop cloth. There's a good picture of it. Frame that, and you'll have a picture a damn sight more honest than this one. You're a gloomy old duck, aren't you? Said the orderly. Is that a crime? Said the painter. The orderly shrugged. If you don't like it here, Grandpa, he said. And he finished the thought with the trick telephone number that people who didn't want to live anymore were supposed to call. The 0 in the telephone number he pronounced not. The number was 2B are not to be. It was the telephone number of an institution whose fanciful sobriquets included Automat, Birdland, Cannery, Catbox, Delouser, Easy Go, Goodbye Mother, Happy Hooligan, Kiss Me Quick, Lucky Pierre, Sheep Dip, Wearing Blender, Weep No More, and Why Worry? To be or not to be was the telephone number of the municipal gas chambers of the Federal Bureau of Termination. The painter thumbed his nose at the orderly. When I decide it's time to go, it won't be at the Sheep Dip. A do-it-yourselfer, eh? Said the orderly. Messy business, Grandpa. Why don't you have a little consideration for the people who have to clean up after you? The painter expressed with an obscenity his lack of concern for the tribulations of his survivors. The world could do with a good deal more mess, if you ask me, he said. The orderly laughed and moved on. Welling, the waiting father, mumbled something without raising his head, and then he fell silent again. A coarse, formidable woman strode into the waiting room on spike heels. Her shoes, stockings, trench coat, bag, and overseas cap were all purple. The purple the painter called the color of grapes on Judgment Day. The medallion on her purple musette bag was the seal of the Service Division of the Federal Bureau of Termination. An eagle perched on a turnstile. The woman had a lot of facial hair, an unmistakable mustache, in fact. A curious thing about gas chamber hostesses was that no matter how lovely and feminine they were when recruited, they all sprouted mustaches within 5 years or so. Is this where I'm supposed to come? She said to the painter. Well, that would depend on what your business was, he said. You aren't about to have a baby, are you? Oh, they told me I was supposed to pose for some picture, she said. My name's Leora Duncan. She waited. And you dunk people, he said. What? She said. Skip it, he said. That sure is a beautiful picture, she said. Looks just like heaven or something. Or something, said the painter. He took a list of names from his smock pocket. Duncan, 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 he said, scanning the list. Yes, here you are. You're entitled to be immortalized. You see any faceless body here you'd like me to stick your head on? We've got a few choice ones left. She studied the mural bleakly. Gee, she said, they're all the same to me. I don't know anything about art. A body's a body, eh? He said, all righty. As a master of fine art, I recommend this body here. He indicated a faceless figure of a woman who was carrying dried stalks to a trash burner. Well, said Leora Duncan, that's more the disposal people, isn't it? I mean, I'm in service. I don't do any disposing. The painter clapped his hands in mock delight. You say you don't know anything about art, and then you prove in the next breath that you know more about it than I do. Of course the sheave carrier is wrong for a hostess. A snipper, a pruner. That's more your line. He pointed to a figure in purple who was sawing a dead branch from a tree. How about her, he said. Do you like her at all? gosh, she said, and she blushed and became humble. That puts me right next to Dr. Hitz. That upsets you, he said. Oh, good gravy, no, she said. It's just such an honor. Ah, you admire him then. Oh, who doesn't admire him, she said, worshipping the portraits of Hitz. It was the portrait of a tanned, white-haired, omnipotent Zeus, 240 years old. Who doesn't admire him, she said again. He was responsible for setting up the very first gas chamber in Chicago. Now, nothing would please me more than to put you next to him for all time. Sawing off a limb, that strikes you as appropriate? That is kind of like what I do, she said. She was demure about what she did. What she did was make people comfortable while she killed them. And while Leora Duncan was posing for her portrait, into the waiting room bounded Dr. Hitz himself. He was 7 feet tall, and he boomed with importance, accomplishments, and the joy of living. Well, Miss Duncan, he said, and he made a joke. What are you doing here? He said. This isn't where the people leave. This is where they come in. We're going to be in the same picture together, she said slyly. Good! And say, isn't that some picture? I sure am honored to be in it with you, she said. Well, let me tell you, he said, I'm honored to be in it with you. Without women like you, this wonderful world we got wouldn't be possible. He saluted her and moved toward the door that led to the delivery rooms. Guess what was just born, he said. I can't, she said. Triplets, he said. Triplets, she said. She was exclaiming over the legal implications of triplets. The law said that no newborn child could survive unless the parents of the child could find someone who would volunteer to die. Triplets, if they were all to live, called for 3 volunteers. Do the parents have 3 volunteers? Said Leora Duncan. Last I heard, said Dr. Hitz, they had 1, and we're trying to scrape another 2 up. Well, I don't think they made it, she said. Nobody made 3 appointments with us. Nothing but singles going through today, unless somebody called in after I left. What's the name? Welling, said the waiting father, sitting up, red-eyed and frowsy. Edward K. Welling, Jr. is the name of the happy father-to-be. He raised his right hand, looked at a spot on the wall, gave a hoarsely wretched chuckle. Present, he said. Oh, Mr. Welling, said Dr. Hitz, I didn't see you. The invisible man, said Welling. They just phoned me that your triplets have been born, said Dr. Hitz. They're all fine, and so is the mother. I'm on my way in to see them now. Hooray, said Welling emptily. You don't sound very happy, said Dr. Hitz. Oh, what man in my shoes wouldn't be happy, said Welling. He gestured with his hands to symbolize carefree simplicity. All I have to do is pick out which one of the triplets is going to live, and then deliver my maternal grandfather to the happy hooligan and come back here with a receipt. Dr. Hitz became rather severe with Welling, towered over him. You don't believe in population control, Mr. Welling, he said. I think it's perfectly keen, said Welling. Would you like to go back to the good old days when the population of the Earth was 20 billion, about to become 40 billion, then 80 billion, then 160 billion? Do you know what a druplet is, Mr. Welling? Said Hitz. Nope, said Welling sulkily. A druplet, Mr. Welling, is one of the little knobs, one of the little pulpy grains on a blackberry, said Dr. Hitz. Without population control, human beings would now be packed on this surface of this old planet like druplets on a blackberry. Think of it. Welling continued to stare at the same spot on the wall. Before scientists stepped in and laid down the law, said Dr. Hitz, there wasn't even enough drinking water to go around and nothing to eat but seaweed. And still, people insisted on their right to reproduce like jackrabbits and their right, if possible, to live forever. I want those kids, said Welling. I want all three of them. Oh, of course you do, said Dr. Hitz. That's only human. I don't want my grandfather to die either, said Welling. Nobody's really happy about taking a close relative to the cat box, said Dr. Hitz gently, sympathetically. I wish people wouldn't call it that, said Leora Duncan. What? Said Dr. Hitz. I wish people wouldn't call it the cat box and things like that, she said. It gives people the wrong impression. You're absolutely right, said Dr. Hitz. Forgive me. He corrected himself, gave the municipal gas chambers their official title, a title that no one ever used in conversation. I should have said Ethical Suicide Studios, he said. That sounds so much better, said Leora Duncan. This child of yours, whichever one you decide to keep, Mr. Welling, he or she is going to live on a happy, roomy, clean, rich planet, thanks to population control, in a garden like that mural there. He shook his head. 2 centuries ago, when I was a young man, it was a hell that nobody thought could last another 20 years. Now, centuries of peace and plenty stretch before us as far as the imagination cares to travel. He smiled luminously. The smile faded as he saw that Welling had just drawn a revolver. Welling shot Dr. Hitz dead. There's room for one, a great big one, he said. And then he shot Leora Duncan. It's only death, he said to her as she fell. There, room for 2. And then he shot himself, making room for all 3 of his children. Nobody came running. Nobody seemingly heard the shots. The painter sat on top of his stepladder, looking down reflectively on the sorry scene. The painter pondered the mournful puzzle of life demanding to be born, and once born, demanding to be fruitful, to multiply, and to live as long as possible. To do all that on a very small planet that would have to last forever. All the answers that the painter could think of were grim, even grimmer surely than a cat box, a happy hooligan, an easy go. He thought of war. He thought of plague. He thought of starvation. He knew that he would never paint again. He let his paintbrush fall to the drop cloths below. And then he decided that he had had about enough of life in the happy garden of life too. And he came slowly down from the ladder. He took Welling's pistol, really intending to shoot himself. But he didn't have the nerve. He put the pistol down, reached for the phone in the pocket of his smock, and entered the well-remembered number 2BR not 2B. Federal Bureau of Termination, said the very warm voice of a hostess. How soon could I get an appointment, he asked, speaking very carefully. Oh, we could probably fit you in late this afternoon, sir. It might even be earlier if we get a cancellation. All right, said the painter, fit me in, if you please. And he gave her his name, spelling it out. Thank you, sir, said the hostess. Your city thanks you. Your country thanks you. Your planet thanks you. But the deepest thanks of all is from future generations.
Thank you, Stephen. Our next piece is made up of two poems, Earthbound and High Flight. The first part, Earthbound, is a poem by Irene Jackson, and the second by John Gillespie McGee, who was an American fighter pilot serving with the British in World War II. This piece will be read by Neil McGarry.
He was one of Bradbury's kind of people who early took to wings, jumped first from the barn roof at home, then from the church steeple, and when his bones were finally out of slings, took off from Baldy's snowy dome, landing this time in a tree. And still he denied the pull of gravity. Instead, he dug the pull of endless time and space, gazed nightly at the stars, read Verne and Wells, became an active flying ace who dreamed of setting foot on, where else? Mars. Or was it old Barzoon? He watched the astronauts return 2 times from walking on the moon and swore he'd break the bonds that held him. Soon. And then one day they came. From out on the bog behind the Carter place, took him and his dog for one swift, silent spin through outer space to Mars itself and back again. I only know they disappeared one day and were gone a long, long time away. Since they came back, they mostly sit and look at the green trees, the garden, and the brook. Oh, I have slipped the surly bonds of earth and danced the skies on laughter-silvered wings. Sunward I've climbed and joined the tumbling mirth of sun-split clouds and done 100 things you have not dreamed of, wheeled and soared and swung high in the sunlit silence. Hovering there, I've chased the shouting wind along and flung my eager craft through footless halls of air. Up the long, delirious, burning blue, I've topped the wind-swept heights with easy grace where never lark or even eagle flew. And while with silent, lifting mind, I've trod the high, untrespassed sanctity of space, put out my hand and touched the face of God.
Thank you, Neil. Our next story is by Richard Matheson. Richard Matheson was a prolific writer of short stories, many of which were adapted for film and television, including 16 episodes of the original Twilight Zone. He's best known for his stories The Incredible Shrinking Man, I Am Legend, and The Legend of Hell House, and one of the best remembered Twilight Zone episodes, Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, featuring a young William Shatner. In the next story, Button Button, we have an ensemble cast to tell the story, which is about a couple with money problems who are visited by a mysterious man with a shocking offer. The story will be told by myself, Emily Murray, Chris Edwards, and Cleo Zanni. Button Button by Richard Matheson. The package was lying by the front door, a cube-shaped carton sealed with tape, their name and address printed by hand.
Mr. and Mrs. Arthur Lewis.
217 East 37th Street, New York, New York, 10016.
Norma picked it up, unlocked the door, and went into the apartment. It was just getting dark. After she put the lamb chops on the broiler, she sat down to open the package. Inside the carton was a push-button unit fastened to a small wooden box. A glass dome covered the button. Norma tried to lift it off, but it was locked in place. She turned the unit over and saw a folded piece of paper, scotch taped to the bottom of the box. She pulled it off.
Mr. Stewart will call you at 8 p.m.
Norma put the button unit beside her on the couch. She reread the typed note, smiling. A few moments later, she went back into the kitchen to make a salad. The doorbell rang at 8 o'clock.
I'll get it.
Norma called from the kitchen. Arthur was in the living room reading. There was a small man in the hallway. He removed his hat as Norma opened the door. Cleo, you're muted.
Mrs. Lewis?
Yes?
I'm Mr. Stewart.
Oh, yes.
She was sure now it was a sales pitch.
May I come in?
I'm rather busy. I'll get you your whatchamacallit, though.
She started to turn.
Don't you want to know what it is?
Norma turned back. Mr. Stewart's tone had been offensive.
No, I don't think so.
It could prove very valuable.
Monetarily?
Mr. Stewart nodded.
Monetarily.
Norma frowned. She didn't like his attitude.
What are you trying to sell?
I'm not selling anything.
Arthur came out of the living room.
Something wrong?
I'm Mr. Stewart.
Oh, the,
Arthur pointed toward the living room and smiled.
what is that gadget anyway?
Well, it won't take long to explain. May I come in?
If you're selling something...
Mr. Stewart shook his head.
I'm not.
Arthur looked at Norma.
Up to you.
He hesitated.
Well, why not?
They went into the living room, and Mr. Stewart sat in Norma's chair. He reached into his inside coat pocket and withdrew a small sealed envelope.
Right here is a key to the Bell Unit dome.
He set the envelope on the chairside table.
The bell is connected to our office.
What's it for?
Well, if you push the button, somewhere in the world, someone you don't know will die, in return for which you will receive a payment of $50,000.
Norma stared at the small man. He was smiling.
What are you talking about?
Well, Mr. Stewart looked surprised.
But I've just explained.
Is this a practical joke?
Oh, no, not at all. The offer is completely genuine.
You aren't making any sense. You expect us to believe...
Whom do you represent?
Mr. Stewart looked embarrassed.
I'm afraid I'm not at liberty to tell you that. However, I assure you, the organization is of international scope.
I think you'd better leave.
Mr. Stewart rose.
Oh, of course.
And take your button unit with you.
Sure, you wouldn't care to think about it for a day or so?
Arthur picked up the button unit and the envelope and thrust them into Mr. Stewart's hands. He walked into the hall and pulled open the door.
Well, I'll just leave my card.
He placed it on the table by the door. Norma was still sitting on the sofa.
What do you think it was?
I don't care to know.
She tried to smile, but couldn't.
Aren't you curious at all?
No.
After Arthur returned to his book, Norma went back to the kitchen and finished washing the dishes. Later, as they were getting ready for bed,
Why won't you talk about it?
Arthur's eyes shifted as he brushed his teeth. He looked at his reflection in the bathroom mirror.
Doesn't it intrigue you?
It offends me.
I know, but doesn't it intrigue you too? Do you think it's a practical joke?
If it is, it's a sick one.
Norma sat on her bed and took off her slippers.
Maybe it's some kind of psychological research.
Arthur shrugged.
Could be.
Maybe some eccentric millionaire is doing it?
Maybe.
Wouldn't you like to know?
Arthur shook his head.
Why?
Because it's immoral.
Norma slid between the covers.
Well, I think it's intriguing.
Arthur turned off the lamp and leaned over to kiss her. Norma closed her eyes.
$50,000.
In the morning, as she left the apartment, Norma saw the card halves on the table. Impulsively, she dropped them into her purse. She locked the front door and joined Arthur in the elevator. While she was on her coffee break, she took the card halves from her purse and held the torn edges together. Only Mr. Stewart's name and a phone number were printed on the cards. After lunch, she took the card halves from her purse and scotch taped the edges together.
Why am I doing this?
Just before 5, she dialed the number.
Good afternoon.
Norma almost hung up but restrained herself. She cleared her throat.
This is Mrs. Lewis.
Oh, yes, Mrs. Lewis.
I'm curious.
Well, that's natural.
Not that I believe a word of what you told us.
Oh, no, it's quite authentic.
Well, whatever. When you said someone in the world would die, what did you mean?
Well, exactly that. It could be anyone. All we guarantee is that you don't know them. Well, of course, you wouldn't have to watch them die.
For $50,000.
That is correct.
That's crazy.
Nonetheless, that is the proposition. Would you like me to return the button unit?
No, certainly not.
She hung up angrily. Returning home that evening, she found the package was lying by the front door. Norma saw it as she left the elevator.
Well, of all the nerve.
She glared at the carton as she unlocked the door.
I just won't take it in.
She went inside and started dinner. Later, she went into the front hall. Opening the door, she picked up the package and carried it into the kitchen, leaving it on the table. She sat in the living room, looking out the window. After a while, she went back into the kitchen to turn the pot in the broiler. Put the package in the bottom cabinet. She'd throw it out in the morning. Later at dinner, she brought up the subject again.
Maybe some eccentric millionaire is playing games with people.
Arthur looked up from his dinner.
I don't understand you.
What does that mean?
Let it go.
Norma ate in silence. Suddenly, she put her fork down.
Suppose it's a genuine offer.
Arthur stared at her.
All right. Suppose it is. What would you like to do? Get the button back and push it? Murder someone?
Norma looked disgusted.
Murder?
Well, how would you define it?
If you don't even know the person.
Arthur looked astounded.
Are you saying what I think you are?
If it's some old Chinese peasant 10,000 miles away, some diseased native in the Congo.
How about a baby boy in Pennsylvania? Some beautiful little girl on the next block?
Now you're loading things.
The point is, Norma, what's the difference whom you kill? It's still murder.
The point is, if it's someone you've never seen in your life and you never will see, someone whose death you don't even have to know about, you still wouldn't push the button.
Arthur stared at her, appalled.
You mean you would?
$50,000.
What has the amount got to do with any of
$50,000, Arthur. A chance to take that trip to Europe we've always talked about.
Norma, no.
A chance to buy that cottage on the island.
Norma, no.
His face was white. She shuddered.
All right. Take it easy. Why are you getting so upset? It's only talk.
After dinner, Arthur went into the living room. Before he left the table, he said,
I'd rather not discuss it anymore, if you don't mind.
Fine with me.
He got up earlier than usual to make pancakes, eggs, and bacon for Arthur's breakfast.
So what's the occasion?
No occasion. I just wanted to do it. That's all.
Good. I'm glad you did.
He refilled his cup.
Wanted to show you that I'm not
Not what?
selfish.
Did I say you were?
Well, last night, all that talk about the button, I think you, misunderstood me.
In what way?
I think you felt that I was only thinking of myself.
Oh.
I wasn't. When I talked about Europe, a cottage on the island,
Norma, why are we getting so involved in this?
I'm not involved at all. I'm simply trying to indicate that
What?
I'd like for us to go to Europe, like for us to have a cottage on the island, like for us to have a nicer apartment, nicer furniture, nicer clothes, a car, like for us to finally have a baby for that matter.
Norma, we will.
When?
Are you really saying?
I'm saying that they're probably doing it for some research project, that they want to know what average people would do under such a circumstance, that they're just saying someone would die in order to study reactions, to see if there'd be guilt, anxiety, whatever. You don't think they'd kill somebody, do you?
Arthur didn't answer. She saw his hands trembling. After a while, he got up and left. When he'd gone to work, Norma remained at the table, staring into her coffee, thinking. While she was stacking dishes, she turned abruptly, dried her hands, and took the package from the bottom cabinet. Opening it, she set the button unit on the table. She stared at it for a long time before taking the key from its envelope and removing the glass dome. She stared at the button. Reaching out, she pressed it.
For us.
She shuddered. Was it happening? A chill of horror swept across her. In a moment, it had passed. She made a contemptuous noise.
Ridiculous to get so worked up over nothing.
She threw the button unit, dome, and key into the wastebasket and hurried to dress for work. That evening, just as she had turned over the supper steaks, the telephone rang. She picked up the receiver.
Hello?
Mrs. Lewis,
Yes.
this is Lenox Hill Hospital. She felt unreal as the voice informed her of the subway accident. The shoving crowd. Arthur was pushed from the platform in front of the train. She was conscious of shaking her head, but she couldn't stop. As she hung up, she remembered Arthur's life insurance policy for $25,000 with double indemnity for.
No.
She couldn't seem to breathe. She struggled to her feet and walked into the kitchen numbly. Something cold pressed at her skull as she removed the button unit from the wastebasket. There were no nails or screws visible. She couldn't see how it was put together. Abruptly, she began to smash it on the sink edge, pounding it harder and harder until the wood split. She pulled the sides apart, cutting her fingers without noticing. There were no transistors in the box, no wires or tubes. The box was empty. She whirled with a gasp as the telephone rang. Stumbling into the living room, she picked up the receiver.
Mrs. Lewis?
It wasn't her voice shrieking. It couldn't be.
You said I wouldn't know the one that died.
My dear lady, did you really think you knew your husband?
Thank you, guys. Our next story is by Ursula K. Le Guin. Ursula K. Le Guin wrote more than 20 novels and over 100 short stories, in addition to poetry, literary criticism, translations, and children's book. In 1969, her most acclaimed story, The Left Hand of Darkness, won the top prize for science fiction novels, the Hugo and Nebula Awards. She has been acclaimed by critics as one of the top fiction writers in any genre, and has influenced many other authors, including Salman Rushdie, Ian Banks, and Neil Gaiman. Her story, The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas, written in 1973, is a political parable, a dark tale about a utopia that contains a terrible secret to its existence. The story will be read by Anna Botsford.
The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas by Ursula Le Guin. With the clamor of bells that set the swallows soaring, the festival of summer came to the city of Omelas, bright towered by the sea. The rigging of the boats in harbor sparkled with flags. In the streets between houses with red roofs and painted walls, between old moss-grown gardens and under avenues of trees, past great parks and public buildings, processions moved. Some were decorous, old people in long, stiff robes of mauve and gray, grave master workmen, quiet, merry women carrying their babies and chatting as they walked. In other streets, the music beat faster, a shimmering of gong and tambourine, and the people went dancing. The procession was a dance. Children dodged in and out, their high calls rising like the swallows crossing flights over the music and the singing. All the processions wound towards the north side of the city, where on the great water meadow called the Greens Fields, boys and girls, naked in the bright air, with mud-stained feet and ankles and long, lithe arms, exercised their festive horses before the race. The horses wore no gear at all, but a halter without bit. Their manes were braided with streamers of silver, gold, and green. They flared their nostrils and pranced and boasted to one another. They were vastly excited, the horse being the only animal who has adopted our ceremonies as his own. Far off to the north and west, the mountains stood up, half encircling Omelas on her bay. The air of morning was so clear that the snow still crowning the 18 peaks burned with white gold fire across the miles of sunlit air under the dark blue of the sky. There was just enough wind to make the banners that marked the race course snap and flutter now and then. In the silence of the broad green meadows, one could hear the music winding through the city streets, farther and nearer and ever approaching, a cheerful faint sweetness of the air that from time to time trembled and gathered together and broke out into the great joyous clanging of the bells. Joyous! How is one to tell about joy? How describe the citizens of Omelas? They were not simple folk, you see, though they were happy. But we do not say the words of cheer much anymore. All smiles have become archaic. Given a description such as this, one tends to make certain assumptions. Given a description such as this, one tends to look next for the king, mounted on a splendid stallion and surrounded by his noble knights, or perhaps in a golden litter borne by great muscled slaves. But there was no king. They did not use swords or keep slaves. They were not barbarians. I do not know the rules and laws of their society, but I suspect that they were singularly few. As they did without monarchy and slavery, so they also got on without the stock exchange, the advertisement, the secret police, and the bomb. Yet I repeat that these were not simple folk, not dulcet shepherds, noble savages, bland utopians. They were not less complex than us. The trouble is that we have a bad habit, encouraged by pedants and sophisticates, of considering happiness as something rather stupid. Only pain is intellectual, only evil interesting. This is the reason of the treason of the artist, a refusal to admit the banality of evil and the terrible boredom of pain. If you can't lick 'em, join 'em. If it hurts, repeat it. But to praise despair is to condemn delight. To embrace violence is to lose hold of everything else. We have almost lost hold. We can no longer describe a happy man, nor make any celebration of joy. How can I tell you about the people of Omelas? They were not naive and happy children, though their children were in fact happy. They were mature, intelligent, passionate adults whose lives were not wretched. A miracle. But I wish I could describe it better. I wish I could convince you. Omelas sounds in my words like a city in a fairy tale, long ago and far away, once upon a time. Perhaps it would be best if you imagined it as your own fancy bids, assuming it will rise to the occasion, for certainly I cannot suit you all. For instance, how about technology? I think that there would be no cars or helicopters in and above the streets. This follows from the fact that the people of Omelas are happy people. Happiness is based on a just discrimination of what is necessary, what is neither necessary nor destructive, and what is destructive. In the middle category, however, that of the unnecessary but undestructive, that of comfort, luxury, exuberance, etc., They could perfectly well have central heating, subway trains, washing machines, and all kinds of marvelous devices not yet invented here. Floating light sources, fuelless power, a cure for the common cold. Or they could have none of that. It doesn't matter, as you like it. I incline to think that people from towns up and down the coast have been coming into Omelas during the last days before the festival on very fast little trains and double-decked trams, and that the train station of Omelas is actually the handsomest building in town, though plainer than the magnificent farmers' market. But even granted trains, I fear that Omelas so far strikes some of you as goody-goody. Smiles, bells, parades, horses, blech. If so, please add an orgy. If an orgy would help, don't hesitate. Let us not, however, have temples from which issue beautiful nude priests and priestesses already half in ecstasy and ready to copulate with any man or woman, lover or stranger who desires union with the deep godhead of the blood, although that was my first idea. But really, it would be better not to have any temples in Omelas, at least not manned temples. Religion, yes. Clergy, no. Surely the beautiful nudes can just wander about, offering themselves like divine soufflés to the hunger of the needy and the rapture of the flesh. Let them join the processions. Let tambourines be struck above the copulations, and the glory of desire be proclaimed upon the gongs. And, a not unimportant point, let the offspring of these delightful rituals be beloved and looked after by all. One thing I know there is none of in Omelas is guilt. But what else should there be? I thought at first there were no drugs, but that is puritanical. For those who like it, the faint, insistent sweetness of drews may perfume the ways of the city. Drews which first brings a great lightness and brilliance to the mind and limbs, and then after some hours of dreamy languor, wonderful visions at last of the very arcana and inmost secrets of the universe, as well as exciting the pleasure of sex beyond all belief. And it is not habit forming. For most modest tastes, I think there ought to be beer. What else? What else belongs in the joyous city? The sense of victory, surely, the celebration of courage. But as we did without clergy, let us do without soldiers. The joy built upon successful slaughter is not the right kind of joy. It will not do. It is fearful and it is trivial. A boundless and generous contentment, a magnanimous triumph felt not against some outer enemy, but in communion with the finest and fairest in the souls of all men everywhere and the splendor of the world's summer. This is what swells the hearts of the people of Omelas, and the victory they celebrate is that of life. I really don't think many of them need to take drews. Most of the processions have reached the green fields by now. A marvelous smell of cooking goes forth from the red and blue tents of the provisioners. The faces of small children are amiably sticky. In the benign gray beard of a man, a couple of crumbs of rich pastry are entangled. The youths and girls have mounted their horses and are beginning to group around the starting line of the course. An old woman, small and fat and laughing, is passing out flowers from a basket, and a tall young man wear her flowers in their shining hair. A child of 9 or 10 sits at the edge of the crowd, alone, playing on a wooden flute. People pause to listen, and they smile, but they do not speak to him, for he never ceases playing and never sees them, his dark eyes wholly wrapped in the sweet, thin magic of the tune. He finishes and slowly lowers his hands holding the wooden flute. As if that little private silence were the signal, all at once a trumpet sounds from the pavilion near the starting line, imperious, melancholy, piercing. The horses rear on their slender legs, and some of them neigh in answer. Sober-faced, the young riders stroke the horses' necks and soothe them, whispering, "Quiet, quiet there, my beauty, my hope." They begin to form in rank along the starting line. The crowds along the racecourse are like a field of grass and flowers in the wind. The festival of summer has begun. Do you believe? Do you accept the festival, the city, the joy? No? Then let me describe one more thing. In a basement under one of the beautiful public buildings of Omelis, or perhaps in the cellar of one of its spacious private homes, there is a room. It has one locked door and no window. A little light seeps in dustily between the cracks in the boards, secondhand from a cobwebbed window somewhere across the cellar. In one corner of the little room, a couple of mops with stiff, clotted, foul-smelling heads stand near a rusty bucket. The floor is dirt, a little damp to the touch, as cellar dirt usually is. The room is about 3 paces long and 2 wide, a mere broom closet or disused tool room. In the room, a child is sitting. It could be a boy or a girl. It looks about 6, but actually is nearly 10. It is feeble-minded. Perhaps it was born defective, or perhaps it has become imbecile through fear, malnutrition, and neglect. It picks its nose and occasionally fumbles vaguely with its toes or genitals as it sits haunched in the corner farthest from the bucket and the 2 mops. It is afraid of the mops. It finds them horrible. It shuts its eyes, but it knows the mops are still standing there and the door is locked and nobody will come. The door is always locked and nobody ever comes, except that sometimes, the child has no understanding of time or interval, sometimes the door rattles terribly and opens and a person or several people are there. One of them may come in and kick the child to make it stand up. The others never come close, but peer in at it with frightened, disgusted eyes. The food bowl and the water jug are hastily filled. The door is locked. The eyes disappear. The people at the door never say anything, but the child, who has not always lived in the tool room and can remember sunlight and its mother's voice, sometimes speaks. "I will be good," it says. "Please let me out. I will be good." They never answer. The child used to scream for help at night and cry a good deal, but now it only makes a kind of whining, "Ah, ah," and it speaks less and less often. It is so thin there are no calves to its legs. Its belly protrudes. It lives on a half bowl of cornmeal and grease a day. It is naked. Its buttocks and thighs are a mass of festered sores as it sits in its own excrement continually. They all know it is there, all the people of Omelis. Some of them have come to see it. Others are content merely to know it is there. They all know that it has to be there. Some of them understand why and some do not, but they all understand that their happiness, the beauty of their city, the tenderness of their friendships, the health of their children, the wisdom of their scholars, the skill of their makers, even the abundance of their harvest and the kindly weathers of their skies depend wholly on this child's abominable misery. This is usually explained to children when they are between 8 and 12, whenever they seem capable of understanding. And most of those who come to see the child are young people, though often enough an adult comes or comes back to see the child. No matter how well the matter has been explained to them, these young spectators are always shocked and sickened at the sight. They feel disgust, which they had thought themselves superior to. They feel anger, outrage, impotence, despite all the explanations. They would like to do something for the child, but there's nothing they can do. If the child were brought up into the sunlight out of that vile place, if it were cleaned and fed and comforted, that would be a good thing indeed. But if it were done, in that day and hour, all the prosperity and beauty and delight of Omelis would wither and be destroyed. Those are the terms. To exchange all the goodness and grace of every life in Omelis for that single small improvement, to throw away the happiness of thousands for the chance of the happiness of one. That would be to let guilt within the walls indeed. The terms are strict and absolute. There may not even be a kind word spoken to the child. Often the young people go home in tears or in a tearless rage when they have seen the child and faced this terrible paradox. They may brood over it for weeks or years. But as time goes on, they begin to realize that even if the child could be released, it would not get much good of its freedom. A little vague pleasure of warmth and food, no doubt, but little more. It is too degraded and imbecile to know any real joy. It has been afraid too long ever to be free of fear. Its habits are too uncouth for it to respond to humane treatment. Indeed, after so long, it would probably be wretched without walls about it to protect it, and darkness for its eyes, and its own excrement to sit in. Their tears at the bitter injustice dry when they begin to perceive the terrible justice of reality and to accept it. Yet it is their tears and anger, the trying of their generosity and the acceptance of their helplessness, which are perhaps the true source of the splendor of their lives. Theirs is no vapid, irresponsible happiness. They know that they, like the child, are not free. They know compassion. It is the existence of the child and their knowledge of its existence that makes possible the nobility of their architecture, the poignancy of their music, the profundity of their science. It is because of the child that they are so gentle with children. They know that if the wretched one were not there sniveling in the dark, the other one, the flute player, could make no joyful music, as the young riders line up in their beauty for the race in the sunlight of the first morning of summer. Now, do you believe in them? Are they not more credible? But there is one more thing to tell, and this is quite incredible. At times, one of the adolescent girls or boys who go to see the child does not go home to weep or rage, does not, in fact, go home at all. Sometimes also a man or woman much older falls silent for a day or two and then leaves home. These people go out into the street and walk down the street alone. They keep walking and walk straight out of the city of Omelas through the beautiful gates. They keep walking across the farmlands of Omelas. Each one goes alone, youth or girl, man or woman. Night falls. The traveler must pass down village streets between the houses with yellow lit windows and on out into the darkness of the fields. Each alone, they go west or north towards the mountains. They go on. They leave Omelas. They walk ahead into the darkness and they do not come back. The place they go towards is a place even less imaginable to most of us than the city of happiness. I cannot describe it at all. It is impossible. It may not even exist. But they seem to know where they're going, the ones who walk away from Omelas.
Thank you, Anna. That's one of the most powerful of all of the science fiction stories I've ever read. And I know for some, it may not be their cup of tea, but I think it's very important that we remember stories like that. Our last story today is by Terry Bisson, an American science fiction and fantasy author. He is best known for his stories, including Bears That Discovered Fire, which won the Hugo and Nebula Award for short fiction in 1990. In this story, Chris Edwards and Cleo Zani play two intergalactic explorers searching for intelligent life in the universe and stumble across an average planet circling a rather ordinary looking star, discovers something extraordinary about its inhabitants.
They're made of meat. Meat. They're made out of meat.
Meat?
There's no doubt about it. We picked up several from different parts of the planet, took them aboard our recon vessels, and probed them all the way through. They're completely meat.
That's impossible. And what about the radio signals? The messages to the stars?
They use radio waves to talk, but the signals don't come from them. The signals come from machines.
So who made the machines? That's who we want to talk to.
They made the machines. That's what I'm trying to tell you. Meat made the machines.
That's ridiculous. How can meat make a machine? You're asking me to believe in, like, sentient meat.
I'm not asking you. I'm telling you. These creatures are the only sentient race in that sector, and they're made of meat.
Well, maybe they're like the orphalai. You know, a carbon-based intelligence that goes through a meat stage.
Nope. They're born meat, and they die meat. We studied them for several of their lifespans, which didn't take long. Do you have any idea what's the lifespan of meat?
Oh, spare me. Okay, maybe they're only like part meat. You know, like the weedle eye, a meat head with an electron plasma brain inside.
Nope. We thought of that, since they do have meat heads like the weedle eye, but I told you, we probed them, and they're meat. All the way through.
And no brain.
Oh, there's brain, all right. It's just that the brain is made out of meat. That's what I've been trying to tell you.
Yeah, so what does the thinking?
You're not understanding, are you? You are refusing to deal with what I'm telling you. The brain does the thinking. The meat.
Thinking meat. You're asking me to believe in thinking meat.
Yes, thinking meat, conscious meat, loving meat, dreaming meat. The meat is the whole deal. Are you beginning to get the picture, or do I have to start over?
No, oh my God, you're serious then? They are like made out of meat?
Thank you! Finally! Yes, they are indeed made out of meat. They've been trying to get in touch with us for almost 100 of their years.
Oh my God. So, what does this meat have in mind?
Well, first it wants to talk to us. Then I imagine it wants to explore the universe, contact other sentiences, swap ideas and information, yeah, the usual.
We're supposed to talk to meat?
Well, that's the idea. That's the message they're sending out by radio. Hello? Anyone out there? Anyone home? That sort of thing.
They actually do talk then? I mean, they use the words, ideas, concepts.
Yes. Well, except they do it with meat.
I thought you just told me they use radio.
Oh, they do. But what do you think is on the radio? It's meat sounds. You know how when you slap or flap meat, it makes a noise? They talk by flapping their meat at each other. They even sing air by squirting air through their meat.
Oh my God, just singing meat. This is altogether too much. So what do you advise?
Officially or unofficially?
Both.
Well, officially, we are required to contact, welcome, and log in any sentient races or multi-beings in this quadrant of the universe without prejudice, fear, or favor. Unofficially, I advise that we erase the records and forget the whole thing.
I was hoping you would say that.
It seems harsh, but you know what? There's a limit. Do we really want to make contact with meat?
No, I agree. 100%. What's there to say? Hello, meat. How's it going? Will this work? How many planets are we dealing with here?
Just one. They can travel to other planets in special meat containers, but they can't live on them. And being meat, they can only travel through sea space, which limits them to the speed of light and makes the possibility of their ever making contact pretty slim. Infinitesimal, in fact.
So we just, pretend there's no one home in the universe.
That's it.
Sounds cruel. But you said it yourself. Who wants to meet me?
No.
The ones who have been aboard our vessels, the ones you probed. You sure they won't remember?
Oh, they'll be considered crackpots if they do. We went into their heads and smoothed out their meat so that we're just a dream to them.
Yes, a dream to me. It's how strangely appropriate that we should be mate's dream.
Well, and we marked the entire sector unoccupied.
Oh, good. Agreed, officially and unofficially. Case closed. Any others? Anyone interesting on that side of the galaxy?
Yes. A rather shy but sweet hydrogen core cluster intelligence in a Class 9 star in G445 zone was in contact 2 galactic rotations ago. Wants to be friendly again.
They always come around.
And why not? Imagine how unutterably cold the universe would be if one were all alone.
I want to thank all of the actors who are been involved with us today. It's great to find these stories, but we really need the actors to pull it off. I want to thank Cleo Zanni, Anna Botsford, Emily Murray, Neil McGarry, Stephen Rourke, Pamela Lambert, and Chris Schultz. And also thank you, Frank, for putting this together for us. We really appreciate you being here. We hope you really enjoyed our show today. And thank you for joining us. We will be back, I believe, on February 20th, that we will have the next edition of our show. Thank you very much for joining us today. And thank you all to all of the actors. Love you guys and just really enjoy working with you.
Thank you.